I'm Hannah Kaplan, and this is the WCS Wild Audio Podcast, where you'll find reported audio stories covering the latest news and newsmakers from the Wildlife Conservation Society's Global Conservation Program, Zoos and Aquarium, and their many partners. We've got a great show today, so let's get to it. This month, governments from around the world are gathering in Mongolia for the 17th conference of the parties to the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. While the meeting focuses on the growing threats of drought and land degradation, it's also an opportunity to draw attention to one of the planet's most important and often overlooked ecosystems. Nat Moss reports.
When most people think about wildlife conservation, they picture tropical rainforests or coral reefs. But some of the world's richest biodiversity depends on landscapes that can appear, at first glance, almost empty. Grasslands and rangelands stretch across every continent except Antarctica. They support billions of people, sustain some of the world's great wildlife migrations, and connect ecosystems across entire countries. For WCS Vice President for International Policy Sue Lieberman, protecting these landscapes means protecting both wildlife and the people who depend on them.
Rangelands or grasslands, areas with significant migratory species, but also areas that are exceedingly important for people and their livelihoods, are found across the globe. In North America, South America, Africa, Asia. These areas, sometimes they're called rangelands. It doesn't mean there's always grazing, but rangelands, grasslands are incredibly important both for biodiversity, particularly of migratory species, but not exclusively, as well as for people. We need to be sure that the ecological integrity of these really important ecosystems are protected and improved and restored for the sake of the people who live there, but also for the sake of nature.
Mongolia is home to one of the world's largest remaining rangeland ecosystems. Stretching across the country's southern reaches, the Gobi Steppe is a landscape of open grasslands, rocky outcrops, and desert plains. For WCS Mongolia Country Director Justine Shanti Alexander, understanding why these ecosystems matter begins with a drive south from the capital, Ulaanbaatar.
It takes our team around a day or 2 days to travel south to the Gobi Steppe, which is a really important rangeland in Mongolia. During those first moments, we see the transition from urban Ulaanbaatar to the open grasslands, the rolling hills. And as you go south, the rolling hills kind of disappear. It gets flatter. It gets less vegetation. You see more rocky outcrops. It looks even more yellow, brown, and the colors kind of all merge together. You miss that green, that bright green that you might see in the summer. But this yellow and orange, it's very special. It's almost like a painting.
That striking landscape is more than a beautiful backdrop. It supports wildlife that moves across enormous distances alongside pastoralist communities that have depended on these lands for generations. Understanding how those species and people share the landscape and how to keep that landscape connected is one of the central themes of this month's meeting in Mongolia.
I mean, we all understand grasslands being important to people and grazing their livestock, but these large interconnected ecosystems are vital for wildlife, particularly migratory mammals. If we think about the saiga, for example, or the Mongolian ass of Mongolia, of the steppes of Central Asia, if we think about the guanaco of Patagonia in South America, if we think about elephants in the Miombo woodlands in Africa, and if we think about migratory caribou in Canada, these ecosystems, their ecological integrity is threatened by human development, it's threatened by overgrazing, it's threatened by desertification, by climate change, by drought. These are critical ecosystems.
Protecting rangelands, however, isn't a matter of drawing lines around protected areas. Many of the species that depend on these landscapes travel enormous distances in search of food and water, following changing seasons and unpredictable rainfall. Conserving them requires thinking at a much larger scale.
What really brought it home for me was when I started working in high altitude ecosystems. many are rangelands, and started understanding how much an area an individual snow leopard needed. And it was only in the last 10 years that we understood that a male, especially from the Gobi, needs around 200 kilometers squared an area of rangeland as its home range, a female around 140 kilometers squared. So that's just an individual snow leopard. If we need to protect the population of snow leopards in these ecosystems, it's thousands and thousands of kilometers squared. So that just crystallized how rangelands really need a different approach.
That realization has been reinforced by more than a decade of research on another iconic species of the Gobi, the kulan, or Mongolian ass. Tracking their movements has revealed that they don't stay within fixed boundaries. Instead, they move with the availability of grass and water, underscoring the importance of keeping these vast landscapes connected.
Since 2012 or so, we've been putting collars on hulans to understand how they use the landscape. And the studies highlighted that their movement is not necessarily predictable. They're nomadic species, moving with the grass, moving with the water. Ensuring that biodiversity persists on these rangelands is not just conserving one area at a small scale. Again, we have to work at the large scale, but we have to also really use science to predict which areas need to be prioritized, and we need to keep these ecosystems connected at the province level in Mongolia or to province level. We need to be working at that scale.
That idea, protecting connected landscapes rather than isolated places, is central not only to conserving Mongolia's wildlife, but to the broader goals of the UN Convention to Combat Desertification. And that's why scientists say healthy rangelands are every bit as important to biodiversity as the forests and oceans that often receive far more public attention.
We need to do good science, spatial planning. If these ecosystems, these large, vast grasslands, are interrupted with roads and development and mining and everything else, then they will not persist into the future and we will lose them. We also need to look at the impacts of drought, the impacts of climate change, the impacts of a burgeoning human population. When I started in this field and went to grad school, there were probably 2.5 billion people on Earth. There are about 8.3 billion people now. Well, how do we manage for the livelihoods, health, security of all people?
The consequences of losing healthy rangelands extends well beyond wildlife. As governments gather in Mongolia, one of the central questions they'll confront is what's at risk if these landscapes continue to degrade.
If we fail to conserve our rangelands, these areas do risk becoming wastelands. We risk losing some of the world's iconic species. We are also putting our own livelihoods under risk, especially in very dry ecosystems such as the Gobi. We depend on these natural springs that are found in these steppe or mountain ecosystems and the grasses that these rangelands produce. A huge number of the population are still pastoralists that depend on the grass for their livestock, which is their main livelihood, either for meat or cashmere or milk products. So if we put these rangelands at risk, we're putting a huge population at risk.
For WCS, those are exactly the kinds of connections this meeting is intended to highlight, between healthy land and biodiversity and the people whose futures depend on both. So about that meeting, like so many policy fora, it begins with an acronym, UNCCD.
The UN Convention to Combat Desertification is holding its 17th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. That's when all the governments come together with partners to take decisions. That meeting is taking place in Ulaanbaatar, the capital of Mongolia, in August 2026.
UNCCD is one of 3 landmark environmental agreements created at the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro. This month's conference, which runs from August 17th to 28th, won't determine the future of the world's rangelands on its own, but it does bring together governments, scientists, conservation organizations, and local communities to decide how these landscapes can be managed in the years ahead. For WCS, it's an opportunity to share decades of field science from some of the world's most important rangeland ecosystems.
WCS works in close to 60 countries around the globe, and in about 17 of those countries, we have active conservation field science programs working in grasslands, working in rangelands, working on biodiversity, and also working with local communities, particularly pastoralists, people who graze their livestock, and we need to deal with that relationship with wildlife. This convention is an important opportunity to share our knowledge and expertise on grasslands, on rangelands, on ecology, on ecological integrity, and wildlife and nature conservation with the governments as they discuss all the issues around desertification, drought, and the impact of climate change, which is severe on rangelands, on grasslands in particular.
For many people, the word desertification evokes an image of barren land. But this meeting in Mongolia is ultimately about something much larger. It's about keeping landscapes healthy enough to sustain wildlife migrations, provide clean water, support pastoralist communities, and preserve cultures that have lived alongside these ecosystems for generations. As delegates gather in Ulaanbaatar over the coming weeks, the decisions they make will help shape the future of some of the planet's largest and least appreciated ecosystems. You can learn more by visiting our website at www.wcs.org. For WCS Wild Audio, I'm Nat Moss.
Today's episode was produced and reported by Nat Moss, with help from Dan Rosen and Hannah Kaplan. The WCS Wild Audio Podcast is a production of the Wildlife Conservation Society. Stay tuned for our next episode, and don't forget to follow, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts.